Hey guys, Pedro here to tell you about the latest from Manchu, The Return of Tomorrow, out June 14th on at the Dojo Records. The album has 13 tracks, 49 minutes in length, and this is the band's 13th full-length studio album. They are an American iconic stoner rock band. From a design standpoint, the album gives you this appearance and this experience of being very linear. It's a record that, from start to finish, it doesn't really change directions. It stays on path. It knows where it's going, it has a start point, a finish line, and it keeps you grounded and connected all the way through. This is the experience that you have at first glance, but it's also the experience that you walk away with. That doesn't mean that the record is exactly like that, because the more you listen to this album, the more you're going to see the uniquenesses that exist within songs within this album. It's not like every track follows the same pattern. But because there are patterns that are repeated themselves throughout the existence of this record across almost every single song, it becomes a lot more difficult to tell the differences when you have so many things in common. Having 13 songs in 49 minutes plays into this. It allows the album to have this more of a blanket that covers all the tracks, and the experience that you walk away with is that experience of linearity, not necessarily focusing on all the individual elements that this record also has in store for you. So it's a structure, it's a design that suffers due to the length of the album itself. As far as the sound is concerned, I think this is an album that is heavily focused on the guitar sound and the guitar experience. And it uses the guitars in a very interesting way because, first and foremost, there is this fuzz, this thickness, this grit in the guitar sound that is pushed up front in the mix. It's really right in front of you. When you're listening to this album, it hits you first. It's the thing that really jumps off, and it's the element that's it's the head of the spear, if you will, as far as the overall sound on this album is concerned. So on one hand, you have the guitars providing consistently that effect, that detail, that sort of sonic output. And that's where that linearity at times really comes from, because this element never changes. It's always in the same spot with a very similar output, with a very similar experience. So you have the guitars there, first and foremost, pushing that fuzziness into the forefront. But then you have the guitar solos, you have some of the leads, some licks here and there that feel a lot more crisp, a lot more clear, that break away from that fuzziness of sound that's really squished all the way into the front. This allows the guitars to become a little bit more dynamic, gives more life to the guitar sound. It also gives better perspective, and it creates more texture. It allows the songs to always keep themselves grounded in that common denominator, but then break away from it almost simultaneously by taking different directions within the path that you're on. Almost like you're still walking in a straight line, but instead of always looking forward, you're taking your time to look to the sides and sometimes even to look backwards. It's a nice element that the guitars add that allows them to break apart from that common denominator, like I said, and this makes the guitar sound all around feel a little bit more complete, feel like it adds a little bit more diversity, and definitely feels like it adds a little bit more warmth and a little bit more texture to the overall sound. A really important element. Now, as the guitars predominantly sit up front with that fuzziness, the drums are all the way in the back. There's quite a bit of space in between the two elements, so this is an album that really separates them, but they're there in order to create a sense of boundaries. One is creating the forward boundary, while the other one is creating the backwards boundary. So the drums are in the background, filling in the sound at that point, which allows then the guitars to be a little bit more upfront and almost separating themselves from the drum sound. The two are interconnected, but the connection is very thin because there's a lot of space in between them, so things get lost while traveling from one point into the other. And that's where the more clear guitar sound with the solos, for example, comes in order to fill in that gap a little bit better. But it's not like it's hollow. The distance between the 2 points, it still has some texture, it still has some sound in between it. So while you can hear them both at a distance from one another, you never really feel like they are completely disconnected from one another. So it's an important element to find ways of creating that separation, but creating that separation with still some roots that tie them back together. And then one of the main elements that lives in that in-between space, it's the vocals. The interesting part about that is that they don't sit there and they don't sit still. They start there, but they move. The vocals on this record have a lot of movement. They always feel like they're coming from within the sound. They're coming from that spot between the guitars and drums, but they move forwards, sometimes pushing all the way to where the guitars are, to where that fuzziness is, sometimes moving a little further back towards the drums, but creating movement nevertheless. It's not about creating forward movement, it's just about creating movement. This makes songs that are a little bit more cumbersome, that don't move as well, feel like they have a lot more life and a lot more energy. It's a nice dynamic, it's a nice element that helps break away that density of sound that exists in the upfront of the overall record. Those guitars, those fuzzy guitars up front, at times become super dense and super compact. So having the vocals have some internal movement within the songs definitely breaks away that density and makes the songs a lot easier to digest, a lot easier to process. But overall, you have a record that has a lot of great qualities to it. And I think the dynamics of this album would have been a lot better had the record been shorter. Not a lot shorter, but just enough that the listener walking away from this record can feel like the album has more energy, has more life, has more uniquenesses. Because right now, the way it sits, the uniquenesses are almost hidden at times. And all you can think of and all you can remember is that fuzziness on the guitar sound being in the forefront on every single track and staying super consistent throughout the entire record. As far as favorite tracks goes, I want to start off with Loch Ness Wrecking Machine. My favorite chorus on the entire album, hands down. This chorus is super hooky, super catchy. One of the hookiest, catchiest songs that this album has to offer, and that is Sing a Lot, because a lot of songs on this album really have those characteristics of just almost pure rock and roll when it comes to those choruses and allowing the chorus to really flourish and find life within the songs. Outside of the fuzz, these guitars on this track have a lot of clear sound to them. There are some clear riffs, obviously the solo section, and that is really important because you're adding texture and you're creating substance within that main space, that main void that exists where the guitars are and where the drums are. That main space in between needs life, needs energy. So adding that solo section, adding some clear guitar riffs really helps enhance the volume and enhance the song all around. The chorus has more volume as well, and I think that's another reason why the chorus is so catchy and so hooky, because the chorus becomes bigger and it's a complete distinct impression and experience from a more controlled verses. The verses keep the pace of the song, the verses are a little bit more steady, and then when you get to the chorus becomes more explosive, more heavy, bigger, more impactful, and that's what identifies this song and that's what it sets it apart. It's really a phenomenal chorus. It's an outstanding song that has a great old school, almost bluesy solo section that really helps fill in that void, that gap that these tracks have more often than not. Next we have Roads of the Lonely, a more driven song, definitely a song that has a little bit more of direction, has a little bit more of intent. It knows where it's going and how it's going to get there. It has a heavier guitar sound with quite a bit of not just fuzziness but distortion behind that heaviness, behind that guitar sound, causing waves in the sound, and so you're creating texture with a different element. So you're still using that fuzziness up front, but now you're adding something to that fuzziness to create a different different shapes, if you will, and trying to separate that commonality and give it some uniqueness. That's how I see this song. Super guitar driven track. The vocals match the experience of the sound extremely well, and they're the perfect pair throughout the entire song. Last but definitely not least, Liquify. Now, sludgier, more stoner, sludgier sound experience, a track that really elevates that guitar fuzz into a different level with the distortion that comes with it. It really jumps off, and it creates a very unique sound and characteristic to the way the track is put together. There are still some clear riffs that help break through the overall density of this track. I feel like this is one of the denser tracks on the album, definitely one of the most layered tracks on the album, and it comes across at times almost like just a very jammy guitar session. It has a lot of almost organic, natural elements to the way the sound is coming across. It feels like they're just jamming on the guitars. They're not necessarily sure where they're going. They're just vibing in the moment, and that vibing in the moment is what creates the atmosphere behind this song. It has really cool vocals. The vocals help bring some life and also help break some of the density of the sound, but it's definitely a very unique guitar sounding song when you compare it to everything else that this album has to offer. It stands alone on that perspective. This is it, Fu Manchu with The Return of Tomorrow, out June 14th. Hit me up in the comment section, let me know your thoughts on the band, and I'll be seeing you all at the next video. Take care, guys.